Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Communications here at PFLAG National. It has been a while since I have been in this seat to bring you something to talk about live. And it is my first time working with our Interim Director of Learning and Inclusion here at PFLAG National, working with her for over a decade. But in this role, on this show, in her new role, let me shut up and just bring her on. Jamie Henkel. Oh, I think you might be muted. That's okay.
We just said make sure you unmute yourself. If you, my goodness,
we're just gonna roll with it. It's all right.
Yeah. How are you?
I am good. I am so happy to be here with you as our interim director, taking on that job, and it is so good to see you. Thrilled to be here.
You too. And it looks like you're in a different place, but I think maybe that's a virtual background.
It is a virtual background covering up the actual background that is a hot mess today. So very grateful for the virtual backgrounds today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for kicking us off. I know you're going to be with people in the comment sections on various platforms. So we will see you soon, maybe.
Have a great show.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Henkel. My pronouns are she and her. And I am the Interim Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG. And I want to thank you all so much for being with us for something to talk about live. As you know, we have shifted to a monthly format, but the format is still the same. We pick a news article, we craft a couple of questions, and we invite a couple of people to have a conversation with us. And this month, because it is LGBTQ History Month and we have National Coming Out Day coming up and International Pronouns Day and Intersex Awareness Day, we wanted to have a conversation about coming out. And the article that we selected is Coming Out Isn't Actually Over. Here's Why, from USA Today by a journalist named David Oliver. And because I think this is such an interesting conversation, I'm not going to give any insight into what I think. I just want to bring our guests in to really get into our conversation. So I'd like to introduce a couple of members of the PFLAG team and family, Mackenzie Hart, Jackson Alder, and Caroline Crowder. Hi, everybody. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
Thumbs up. All right. Well, so I think that first, I would love it if everybody could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you're connected to PFLAG. And if you're willing, let us know sort of how you identify and whatever you're willing to share in that regards. And Caroline, how about we start with you?
Awesome. And also, I didn't answer your question earlier, so sorry about that. I'm doing great. But my name's Caroline. I use they, them pronouns. And I was PFLAG's summer and fall advocacy and policy intern. So excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And Mackenzie, how about you next?
Hey, Jamie. My name is Mackenzie Hart. I am the Learning and Inclusion Manager here at PFLAG. So Jamie and I just did 3 trainings today, so we're both a little excited to be here, but it's been a good but tiring day. But I identify as bisexual, and that to me that means that I can be attracted to genders like and unlike my own as my identity.
And Jackson.
Hello, my name is Jackson. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the Senior Digital Strategist here at PFLAG National. And I identify as a trans and non-binary queer person. I love everybody, or have the potential to love everybody. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing those pieces of yourself with us. And I'm wondering, National Coming Out Day is October 11th. It's coming up next week. And I'm wondering if you could each tell me just a little bit about, like, how do you feel about an event like National Coming Out Day? What does it mean to you? And is there anything that you'd like people to know about that particular event that happens every year on October 11th? And Mackenzie, because you're at the top of my screen, let's start with you for this one.
Thank you. So I think that National Coming Out Day is fantastic. I think that events honoring the act of coming out and owning your own queerness and your own identity in any way, shape, or form is a very good thing. I think that have days like National Coming Out Day, that coming out in of itself has to be a practice that, in order to be seen as valid by many of your peers, by many others in society, it's an expectation that we as queer people have to come out. But that being said, I think that when people are making that choice for themselves and taking that as an opportunity to own their own identities, it's a really wonderful thing. And having days like this to create those opportunities can be a really, really helpful and positive thing. So I'm glad that that it exists in a society where we are considered to have to do this act.
Yeah. Now, Caroline, what about you?
Yeah, I can mostly speak from like a collegiate level, like looking at it from a college. Because before attending college, I wasn't really aware of National Coming Out Day. Just would see it like on Instagram and Facebook and different social media platforms, but I never participated in it. Just based on my experience of where I was going to school, and then when I came to college, it was really a beautiful time of learning about what coming out is and how many like different forms it can take. And I love that there's just a day to celebrate just so many different facets of the LGBT community.
Wonderful. And it sounds like we're all thumbs up on National Coming Out Day. But Jackson, what do you think?
I would echo a lot of what Mackenzie and Caroline said. It is a great day, and I also want folks to know that it can put pressure on folks to feel like they have to come out because of this big day, and you don't. If you're not ready, it's okay. You are valid, you are celebrated and loved, regardless of if you're out to everybody, if you're out to nobody, or anything in between.
Yeah, well, and Jackson, that's just like a phenomenal lead into my next question, which is I'm wondering if you all have any resource recommendations for people who are thinking, you know what, National Coming Out Day is coming up. It's next week. And I'm exploring my identity and I don't necessarily know what that means for me, or I want to share, but I just haven't yet, or even like I'm struggling because I feel like people are unsupportive. I have come out. Do you have any resources that you would recommend to someone who was thinking about National Coming Out Day as this opportunity to share a part of who they are? And Jackson, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. So I'm biased because we all work together, but I would say our resources at pflag.org, there's tons of resources, whether you yourself are coming out, whether you're a parent and are finding out that your child or your loved one is coming out. We also have resources for coming out later in life. I think we have a wealth of them that can be helpful for anybody related to coming out.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, Caroline, how about you? I think your perspective on a college campus would be really interesting.
Yeah, plug PFLAG again, but also I think utilizing the online space is so important, especially when you're figuring out and you have those big questions and you don't have the space to explore those. So just like utilizing as many online resources, but making sure that they're safe. And I think personally, I think the Trevor Project has like a multitude of different resources, but especially their talk space. I know a lot of high schoolers utilize that. So plug the Trevor Project. I like them a lot.
Yeah. And Mackenzie, how about you?
Well, both Caroline and Jackson took the examples I was thinking of, but one very specific PFLAG resource that I recommend is our When Someone Comes Out PFLAG Academy online training, which we have recorded, and we have a resource page. And on that page, we also have a lot of links to other groups that are LGBTQ plus connected and might be connected to other communities, and talk about some of those intricacies around coming out based on whatever other communities you're a member of. So I would definitely give that specific page a look.
Awesome. Thank you. Now we're going to get a little bit more personal with the questions that are coming up, so I hope you're ready. But I'm wondering if you can each share sort of in your personal experience how often you feel like you have to come out to other people, and like what are the kinds of considerations that you make to decide if a space is safe enough for you to share that part of yourself. And do you ever feel like there's like an obligation to be out in a particular space? Because it's such a nuanced conversation for so many. So I just love to hear your insights. And Caroline, why don't we start with you with this one?
Could you ask what the first question was? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really just sort of, how often do you feel like you have to come out to others? And are there spaces where you feel like there's some sort of obligation for you to be out?
Mm-hmm. I feel like it definitely changes like how I like presented myself. So like when I was first coming out as like a lesbian and I had longer hair or dressed a little bit more femininely, there was like nobody was ever like asking me. But when I started finding ways of presenting myself that were more affirming, I started to receive more questions about my identity, and then from there, I felt not necessarily an obligation, but just like to inform people to make me feel more comfortable and like I could be myself, especially like with changing pronouns and having to have that conversation with professors, your friends, your family members. So
That's an interesting perspective. I think that I hadn't thought about part of that obligation is to affirm yourself. So thank you so much for sharing that. Jackson, how about you?
I echo the affirming yourself. I have to come out almost daily because I am trans, because I am non-binary. If I want to feel respected, I have to let folks know, hey, these are my pronouns. At the minimum, hey, these are my pronouns. And then that kind of escalates or evolves the conversation into being non-binary. And sometimes it comes into being trans, but I come out, if not daily, then several times a week.
Yeah, Mackenzie, how about you?
I think it really depends. I think that it's an interesting conversation to have around being non-binary because we are taught to really binary genders, and I mean even informal language, sir and ma'am and ladies and gentlemen, and that's how we are taught how to be respectful. And so a lot of the time people might see me from afar, not necessarily see how tall I am, not hear my voice, and don't know how they should address me. So, I mean, people will say ma'am and then correct themselves to sir or vice versa, and they don't really know what to do. And in those moments, it's weirdly affirming to me because that means that I am presenting as that androgynous expression that I would like to be able to express as. But to them, it's feeling disrespectful that they don't know when they're trying to make that choice. So in those moments, it's almost strange. It's like, oh, I'm already out when they're confused. And then when they decide on something to address, it's like, oh, they're not seeing me as my gender identity anymore. Now they're seeing me as this binary gender that they've kind of chosen. And I would say that it's in some ways similar to my bi identity as well, that depending on who I'm interested in or who I'm with at a night out or something, what friends I'm with, people will probably make certain assumptions about me, and then that's a more awkward conversation to kind of have unless it's specific circumstances. But I don't know how often I am coming out because it's kind of based on identities that don't fit neatly into binary. So it's not the same as saying, oh, I'm actually not this, I'm this, and kind of going to the other side. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And again, thank you all for being a part of this conversation and sharing these pieces of yourself and your experiences, because you've all, I mean, I've been doing this work at PFLAG for 15 years, and you've given me something new to think about. So I really, really appreciate that. And my next question is just sort of centered around the language that we use when we talk about this experience of sharing our sexual orientation, our gender identity, our gender expression, or any combination thereof with others. And I'm wondering if you personally know somebody who uses an alternative to the phrase coming out to describe that experience, and like things like inviting in or using a word like disclosure, or any alternatives that I'm not even thinking of, stepping up. I'm not totally sure, but do you know people who use some of those alternatives? And if so, like what words are they using? And if not, do you have an opinion on why that might not be the case? And Mackenzie, I know we just heard from you, but I'm going to start with you for this one.
Thank you. So I actually tend not to. I do tend to hear coming out most often. But in a strange way, I hear kind of an opposite word a lot. I hear about closeting a lot, where it's kind of the act of being kept in the closet, kept not out, having your sexuality or gender identity kept kind of a secret, kept hidden away. And so that is something that I actually hear quite a bit in some of the spaces that I'm in, but it's almost like the exact opposite of what we're talking about today in an interesting way.
Yeah, and Caroline, what about you?
Yeah, I was trying to think, like trying to rack my brain of like something that's different than coming out, but kind of similar to Mackenzie, like I hear closeted or yeah, in the closet most often, more than coming out. And I'm just interested, like, what other terms people have.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jackson, in the work that you do in this sort of digital space, what's your experience been like?
I do hear coming out most often, but also in the various queer groups that I'm personally in, I hear nerdy things like leveling up, or coming out as somebody's authentic self, kind of adding that piece to it. Those are what I hear most often, and then some kind of funny plays on those.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have to admit, I love the phrase inviting in. It's something I started reading about sort of in 2010-ish, I think. And it really was, to me, just this breathtaking new way of talking about that experience. Like, I don't have this responsibility to come out to you. I am inviting you to know this one more piece of myself. So it'll be interesting to see if that does ever become more common or language that people use, because I just think it is such an amazing way to take away this stigma of being in a closet or hiding. And instead, I just want you to know this new thing about me. And that does sort of bring me to my next question, which for all of you, I'm wondering, do you think that this idea of coming out puts too much responsibility on people who are LGBTQ plus? Like, what does coming out mean for people who defy labels or who have more fluid identities that shift and change over time? And honestly, do you think there will ever be a time where we're able to say, hey, people don't have to do this? We don't assume that being straight and cisgender is the default. And Jackson, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Sure. So I hope, first off, I hope that we get to a time when people don't have to come out and when cis and straight is not the default. I think we're a very long way from that. And in the interim, I do think that it can put pressure on folks to constantly have to come out or as their gender identity and sexuality evolve. I know for myself, I ended up having to come out twice. First when I came out as a lesbian, and then again when I came out as trans and queer. And I hope that we can get to a place where generally folks understand that these things, gender identity and sexuality, can be fluid, or they can evolve, they can grow as we as humans grow and have more experiences and go through life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jackson. And Mackenzie, what about you on this one? Do you think that there's too much responsibility placed on people who hold these identities? Do you think we'll make it to that day that Jackson hopes for?
I think yes. I think too much responsibility is put onto us. And I also think that it stems from this belief that you have to be out to non-queer people in order to be seen as valid, because non-queer people drive the mechanisms of culture and society in such a way that it feels like a requirement, which I just don't think is good. I don't like that. But I also don't know what the solution in that particular situation is, where then it becomes, you know, are people who are like our identities that fixed our identities able to kind of shift and change? Can people who don't outwardly identify in certain queer ways? And I just don't have a straightforward answer on that. I don't think anyone does. I don't think anyone could. I do think that my hope is that one day we do get to a sense of not needing to come out. But I think that, like Jackson said, we are not anywhere close. I don't know if any of us will see it in our lifetimes, but I think that there would need to be a lot of work done across the board to erase a lot of the binaries that we have built up in our head, a lot of unpacking those biases we have. Because even when people say things like, oh, we shouldn't assume what someone's sexuality is, or we shouldn't speculate on someone's sexuality, what they're always saying is we shouldn't talk about if someone's queer. We shouldn't violate that privacy, which is a good sentiment to have. It is something that we should say. People should be able to have privacy if that is what they are seeking out. But as a result, it means that we are always making the assumption that someone is straight and cisgender. I mean, a lot of people who are very immersed in the movement and in trans rights and in a lot of these campaigns and really are well-meaning and have put the work in, still ask questions like, oh, what gender is your baby when the baby is being born, or having those experiences, because we haven't done all of the unpacking that we need to do. And not saying that judgmentally. I have a lot of friends who identify as non-binary, who are very much aligned outside of those expected gender identities, and they will still ask those types of questions and they'll still have those types of conversations. So when I'm saying we need to unpack it, I mean everyone, including people who have already done a lot of the unpacking, because it's so embedded in how we're feeling. But of course, that can only really happen when we do push back against the threats that are happening against us. That these are higher level conversations. These are very internalized conversations. They are so important if we do want to reach the level that we're talking about. But when there are active threats against us, including physical threats, there are things that need to be dealt with more, or there should be more priority. But that should always be our overarching goal, I think. That was a very long answer, but I hope that it all made sense.
It absolutely all made sense. And Mackenzie, you know how much I appreciate you. And thank you again for sharing your insights and your experiences. Caroline, is there anything that you want to add to that, just from your life and your experience?
Yeah, I really liked like so many different parts, and it was like kind of grabbing onto a bunch of different parts. But I think it really is a process of unlearning and then relearning, especially how we went back to in an earlier question about like ladies and gentlemen, or like using more gender neutral language in group settings. Like both calling out, but also like calling in and checking in with the people who use that language. I think it takes off the obligation of people who are queer presenting or in queer spaces to like do that work. Yeah, I like everything that everybody else said.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Now, I'm going to go back to one of the questions that we actually made available publicly for folks to use in their own conversations. And this is probably a quick one, but I'm wondering if you can each personally identify or think of a public figure, maybe an actor or an athlete or a politician or somebody in the sort of public sphere who their coming out story, that conversation that they were having in that public sphere impacted you personally, helped you to understand who you were a little bit better, or communicate with somebody in your life about how you identified, because I think that is an experience that a lot of people have. So I'm just wondering if there's anyone that comes to mind. If not, that's totally okay. But I'd love, Jackson, if there's anything that comes to mind for you.
It does. Yeah. I'm laughing. It's very lesbianic, and I love it. When Melissa Etheridge came out in 1993, that for me was a bit of a light bulb moment for me of like, oh, so there's this thing that I can maybe have words to from how I was feeling. And then that kind of progressed of like, oh, yep. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Caroline, how about you?
I'm gonna think of like really current icons. Like I think Elliot Page did a great job. I love Page Boy. And then a new podcast that like came out like a few months ago, Handsome, with Mae Martin, Tignataro, and Fortune Feimster. I think the way they talk about gender, their sexuality, I like can deeply resonate with, but it's
Mhm.
also a way, like a podcast format that I can share episodes with my mom or like my friends and be like, oh, I relate to this. Like, how do y'all feel? So
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Now, Mackenzie, how about you?
There have been many, but one person that came to mind when you were asking the question was Miley Cyrus, and it was partially because she had talked about kind of her experience of gender identity, which many headlines just said that Miley came out as gender queer, but I actually never saw that in an official quote, so I don't know what exact language Miley was using there. But I do remember Miley talking about being pansexual and describing it in such a way that was very bi-erasive. It was very much erasing the experience of bi people by saying that pansexuality is trans inclusive while bisexuality isn't, which is just an untrue thing to say. But recently, a video of Miley Cyrus was going around where she used the word bisexual to describe herself, and I think that indicated that she probably learned that she was incorrect in the definition she was using in that, and realized that, oh, maybe this language could apply to me. And I really appreciated that as someone who has also had journeys with language, which I think that many of us hear certain words and we hear some misinformation and we sometimes repeat it because we don't know, and it aligns with us that we're incorrect. Having that opportunity for growth can be a really important growing experience, and I'm glad that we kind of got to see a little bit of that with Miley Cyrus.
Thank you. And Miley's getting a lot of love right now, so I appreciate that. And I just want to note that, bringing the ally perspective into this conversation just a little bit, I have a vivid memory of one of my very closest friends from college's dad, after I started working at PFLAG, telling me, well, when I was a young man, I had a lot of problems with people who were a part of that community. And when I found out that Freddie Mercury was a member of the LGBTQ community, it just changed my perspective on everything. Because if Freddie could be bi, then, maybe the LGBTQ community was okay. So it was an interesting insight that I couldn't help but mention after hearing some of those stories that you just shared with us. So we've got a couple minutes left, and I'm wondering what is your number one recommendation for allies like me who really do want to demonstrate support to someone in their life who has very recently come out and shared this piece of themselves with the world around them. And Caroline, why don't we start with you for our last question?
I love that this is the last question. I think it first starts with listening, but I say it as like also actively listening. And then once you have built that basis of listening, you can then take action. By taking action is doing the active work of using people's pronouns, or like getting into the media and finding clips of like queer people, and then just doing that work yourself so that you can be a better ally to a family member, a friend, a colleague, anyone.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Mackenzie, how about you?
I think that's fantastic. I think saying thank you for sharing and showing gratitude that this person shared their experiences with you is vital. I'd also say that remember that they are still the person that you knew before, and that your relationship is still the relationship it was. And I mean that in both negative and positive ways. Sometimes people might say, oh, you're not who I thought you were. Or on the other side, people might start talking to you very differently, and that is often also uncomfortable. So remember that they're the same person and your relationship is the same as it was.
Thank you, Mackenzie. And Jackson, we're going to let you get the last word.
Echoing everything that both Mackenzie and Caroline said, and just add that letting them lead, letting them own how they identify and who wants to know, and how folks can know, and making sure that you're respectful of that.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate all three of you. I hope that has come across as a part of today's conversation. I feel like you were all so brave and you shared so much of yourself. So I'm honored that we had this conversation today. Thank you all so much, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime on Something to Talk About. All right, well, that does bring us to the end of our time together. I hope that you all will consider joining us for Something to Talk About live again when we have our next show in November. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.